Amid the news of the tariffs, we get the Zelensky stuff entering a new chapter. Wow, we had some fireworks, did we not, on Friday? It was really something. And now, apparently Zelensky, and I watched it, I don't speak Ukrainian, forgive me, but AP did this interview with him, and he said via the translation, and that is the headline, of course, that they went with, that this war is going to go on and on. I'm a little confused because it seemed as though yesterday he was out telling another news organization, perhaps it was Reuters, that he would go along with the U.S. And so it was like, all right, well then what was Friday about, really? And I think he's kind of mixed up and he's all over the place. But here's Donald Trump referring to this Associated Press interview, the Associated Press, which refuses to recognize the Gulf of America.
President Zelensky supposedly made a statement today in AP. I'm not a big fan of AP, so maybe it was an incorrect statement. But he said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time. And he better not be right about that. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. In other words, Donald Trump wants this whole thing to end. That's what this is about. That's what you saw in terms of those fireworks, which were pretty magnificent. But I guess, magnificent perhaps is the wrong word choice because we want a solution to this thing. And I do believe that Zelensky came there looking for that solution. He wanted the solution, but he had been reportedly prepped by some people on the left before going into those meetings. He needed that deal. But the bias that was coming from some people on the left was rather significant because, they want him to stand tall for Ukraine, whatever. And they didn't want him to just give in to Donald Trump and the mineral deal. I mean, everybody knows that really the only way out of this is to have the U.S. involved in some way, shape, or form. And Donald Trump wants to get paid for it, right? He doesn't want to just keep shelling out money. So the only answer really is the mineral deal. I think every pragmatist would tell you that. In fact, I even saw one CNN anchor, Jake Tapper, who's a good spokesperson for the deep state, if you would. And he actually came out with a tweet over the weekend saying he spoke to somebody who had been once extremely supportive of Ukraine, saying really, the only options right now, as they laid them out, the only good option would be to take this deal with the United States, with Donald Trump, and try and actually come to some kind of solution here. So that's where we are. And yet, for whatever reason, Zelensky, perhaps because he had these people in his ear, went into that meeting on Friday, and it wound up deteriorating around 40 minutes in. I mean, you can actually mark the moment, in part because J.D. Vance was sort of like, hey, you know what? We got to use a little more diplomacy here. You got Zelensky freaking out saying, well, no, it's Putin, it's Putin, it's Putin. And finally, Trump's like, I've had it. You have no cards. It was like watching an episode of The Apprentice.
Your country is in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No. You've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning.
I know.
You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
you haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
you
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this cabinet.
We gave you, through this
said
stupid president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment,
You
and you
voted
men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
What about
if you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me.
equipment,
You invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
Yeah, he's right. Right? In other words, he needed us. He still needs us. And I'm just looking at some of your comments here, which are interesting. Michael Varney making the point, I won't say the word, but in Ukrainian, and you heard him muttering this, it's alleged. I'm going to be careful how I phrase this only because, again, I don't speak Ukrainian, Michael. Thank you for your generosity, by the way. But apparently he said a bad word about Vance, or maybe about the whole situation under his breath. And Thomas Conservative writing, what about Chris Murphy? That would be the senator from Connecticut, you guys, the Democrat senator from Connecticut. You know what he did violates the Logan Act. He needs to be arrested. So what has come out is that Senator Murphy may have had some conversations ahead of time with Vladimir Zelensky to try and kind of steer him, help prep him in these negotiations. And I'll tell you this, whatever Murphy did, it was not a good idea. It was not a good idea because he goosed him up in a way that led to this catastrophe. Here's the thing. Zelensky had one job. It was to secure that mineral rights deal. That was the only thing he should have been trying to do. You don't need to go and do the bidding of your political Democrat friends. You shouldn't be doing that, because if you're working on behalf of the Ukrainian people, they need that deal. And so the only thing he needed to do was go in there and eat humble pie. And, if J.D. Vance said something he didn't like, he could have stared down at his shoes, but he didn't. He started fighting back. And I wonder about that, because the guy's an actor, okay? Like, he's an actor. Like, an actor ought to be able to keep it together and pretend at least, but he couldn't. So he's either enormously stupid, or he was pushed by Democrats to try and do something that would make it look like, oh, Donald Trump is just, right there in Putin's pocket. And so then if you looked at the airwaves and the aftermath, and still today, that's all I saw on MSNBC and CNN, and I'm not going to bore you with those sound bites, but just know it's out there. They're all saying, oh, well, he's just in Putin's pocket. That's all it is. I'm sorry, guys. You know what? This is a lot more complicated than that. Here's another excerpt from that Friday meeting.
Maybe he did. I don't know what happened, but he didn't break it with me. He wants to make a deal. I don't know if you can make a deal. The problem is, I've empowered you to be a tough guy. And I don't think you'd be a tough guy without the United States. And your people are very brave. But you're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out. I don't think it's going to be pretty, but you'll fight it out. But you don't have the cards. But once we sign that deal, you're in a much better position. But you're not acting at all thankful. And that's not a nice thing. I'll be honest, that's not a nice thing. All right, I think
Trump was livid. Like I've seen that or heard that tone in him before. That was totally genuine. That was totally real. And it did remind me in some ways of like Dad is coming home, and you had like the little kid who's sitting there and he's getting read the riot act by Dad, who's like, I'm tired of paying for your lifestyle. Right? I think he actually did that to Junior at one point, like early when Junior was young. He apparently was living a lifestyle that his dad did not approve of, and his dad was like, no. So you can see that same conversation, right, happening. And Zelensky's getting that message. And the other thing that came out of that, and I think that this is healthy, this is good. You get the UK saying we're going to commit $2 billion. Great. The Europeans are stepping up to the plate. This is Donald Trump saying, hey, it's about time.
We're committed to NATO, but NATO has to step up, and the Europeans have to step up more than they have. And I want to see them equalize, because they are in for far less than we're in, and they should be at least equal. You understand that? Why is the United States, we have an ocean in between, why is the United States in for so much more money and other things as Europe? With that being said, and as you said, they've also been obviously very helpful, but we have put in far more than they have, and I think they should equalize.
You can't be in a situation where the U.S. is the only game in town, right? There is this equalization that is needed, that is desired, because this is a lot of money we're talking about. I mean, and hey, they don't even know where all this money is. They don't know where it's all gone. We're going to get to that in a second, because I think that this is important. I want to play you a soundbite of Zelensky admitting that he has no idea where it's gone. But before I do, think about this. I want to show you this map, guys. This is kind of an important one to look at, because this is a map of sort of what Ukraine and what Europe actually, I should specifically Europe, looked like back in 1998 versus 2022. So, during the end of the Cold War, there was this agreement that was struck, and the idea was, you weren't going to keep encroaching on Russia. And yet somehow along the way, we just kept encroaching on Russia. So if you think about it in sort of simplistic terms, it would be like if suddenly the United States was dealing with China at its borders, right? China has actually played a role in Panama and some other locations there in South America. But I think that if you think about how this map has changed in such a short amount of time, you can be somewhat sympathetic to the situations that the White House, that the Kremlin is dealing with. I want to quote from you. This is actually the man, he's now deceased, George Kennan, who was the famous ambassador to the USSR during the Cold War. And he understood Russia very well, the USSR extremely well. And he wrote in a 1997 New York Times op-ed that expanding NATO, this is the direct quote, I actually tweeted this out, this is from my Twitter account, expanding NATO would be the most fateful error of American policy in the entire post-Cold War era. Such a decision may be expected to inflame the nationalistic, anti-Western, and militaristic tendencies in Russian opinion, to have an adverse effect on the development of Russian democracy, to restore the atmosphere of the Cold War to East-West relations, and to impel Russian foreign policy in directions decidedly not to our liking. So this is the guy who helped negotiate the peace deal, right? And forgive me, who oversaw, he did on the 10, he did help negotiate the peace deal there with Russia, but he actually in the 1950s, like during the middle of the Cold War, was very, very involved, and he understood the Russian culture. So I think this is kind of a significant warning, but Hillary Clinton didn't take it, Dick Cheney didn't take it, no one took it, right? And instead we just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and now we're kind of in a situation where, again, this is not to sympathize with them, but to just say, listen, there's more sides to the story. It's what I've said all along. It's actually what JD said, that you need better diplomacy and that this was a missed opportunity. And because of that lack of diplomacy, we wound up in a situation where lives are being lost. And that's why Trump is like, no, this can't continue. I mean, lives are being lost, and of course, money is being lost. U.S. taxpayer dollars, they're being lost. He's upset about the $350 million. He's like, you weren't alone, Zelensky. We gave you $350 billion dollars. And so we want to make sure that if we're going to keep pouring in money, one, that as many people don't die, and two, that we get paid back, hence the mineral deal. Here's Zelensky talking in Ukrainian. You can see the translation, and I'll read it to you, about where the money is or is not going. They can't account for it.
Дивіться, я коли чую, і раніше чув, і сьогодні ми чуємо від Сполучених Штатів Америки, що Америка дала Україні сотні мільярдів.
And I'm giving this translation, if you would, for some of our Apple Podcast listeners. Thank you for listening on Apple Podcasts. He said the exact figure that was supported or voted on by Congress, he's saying a much lower number. He said, look, it was 177, but I tell you, we received just over 75 billion. And then he goes on, this is very interesting what he says here. He goes on to say that is 100 billion of these 177 or 200, some people say we have never received. I'm like, well, wait, what? And he goes, and this is important because we're talking about specific things. And then he explains, because it's not just the weapons, right? And not just the money. We got 70 billion worth of it. He said there's the training, there's additional transport. There's not only the price for weapons. There's all this other stuff. All the extra, shall we say, humanitarian programs. There you go. Social programs. That's important. The humanitarian, the social programs, and hey, I don't know, the social media programs, whatever you guys are doing, one might say it is the biggest money laundering operation in recent history. And, I guess that's part of the benefit of war, right? Everybody's getting paid. I mean, the sad thing is you get actual people dying, and that's not right. And so if there is a diplomatic solution, if there's an economic solution, we should always be taking that route every single day, all day long. But consider, Zelensky's out there saying, well, we don't really know where all the money went because there's all these other things. Like it's the humanitarian effort. It's the social effort. It's the my wife's stylist effort. And gosh, my pajama clothes that I wear to the White House effort, right? I'm being facetious. But in all seriousness, Zelensky's wife has a stylist. Like somebody who picks out all the clothes and coordinates the clothes and gets paid to do that. I mean, a little weird, right? In a war-torn region. I found this article and I thought it was kind of interesting. I wanted to share it with you from the New York Times. This is in July of 2024. Why does the First Lady of a country at war need a stylist? My question, exactly. New York Times, we actually agree on something. And then they're writing, as Olena Zelensky accompanies her husband to Washington for the NATO summit, her stylist discusses the roles clothes play in the war effort. Interestingly, his wife was a film script writer. He was an actor. And of course, they have stylists. One of the things that came out in that article was that this particular stylist was hired because she needed someone just for herself. Apparently he's got somebody else, right, who picks out those weird Star Trek outfits. I don't have one of my Star Trek outfits on today. You know, no spacesuits, just an American flag. Anyway, why can't she just wear an American flag? Like, forgive me, a Ukraine flag, right? Like simple stuff, like whatever she wants to wear, I'm sure it's fine. Like, I'm sorry, lady, if you are a grown woman and you can't figure out what to wear when you come to Washington or to a NATO summit, then like, I don't know what to tell you. I really don't. Here's the quote from the article. The most important thing in this work, says the stylist, is that the clothes support her. When she has to address the U.S. Congress, we started to work with outside designers and prepare outfits. We wanted to use every detail to make her speech even stronger. I mean, this is kind of nauseating, right? Like, why am I reading this? Really and truly, why does the First Lady of a country at war need a stylist? Let's go right back to the question the New York Times asked in its headline. And they say, well, it's important. It's important with the image, the image, the image. You know, I got to tell you, I'm a little over image. I think all of us are, right? The controlled imaging that we got out of the White House for the last 4 years is something that we're all still suffering with PTSD from, and we appreciate the authenticity. I mean, that was the interesting part about this meeting with Zelensky, all 40 minutes of it. And well, I mean, that's when it got interesting. The first 40 minutes were very interesting too, right? Like that's when they were in this negotiation. It seemed like everything was going to go okay. And then 40 minutes in, all HELL breaks loose. And we got to see that, right? Again, thinking about the transparency and how everything doesn't need to be so tied up with a nice little bow. This is a very different kind of crowd. So I would just say, you know what? Elena Zelensky, if you can't dress yourself at this age, and you are in a war-torn region, I really don't think that we should be paying, and you know it's we, by the way, for your stylist, okay? Like, that is not acceptable. That is not okay, right? It is good to see you guys. Independence, free thinking. People need to start getting charged and arrested for treason, starting with Chuck Schumer, ASAP. You know, I wonder what's going to happen. Again, this is what I'm hearing through sources, that he was effectively sort of goosed to go in there and primed to go in there. And folks like Chris Murphy or others connected with the Biden administration, Obama administration, were trying to help him along. Well, they definitely didn't help him. That was not helpful at all. I mean, maybe it was helpful to them because then they could get out and parrot some narrative that, oh, Donald Trump only cares about Putin. No, he actually cares about getting something done. His point was, I don't know, whether Putin will do a deal or not, but like, hey guys, like, let's try, right? Let's give it a shot. Should we not? I mean, and then you get Zelensky with his wife. They've got every incentive in the world, sadly, to kind of keep this going from a financial perspective. And I don't want to be too harsh and too tough about that. But I would say that that's kind of an important thing to think about right now, right? The motivations of some of these people.